welcome to Navigating the 9 to 5. My name's Tess and I will be your host for today. I'm very excited to say that today is another episode of Your Workplace Agony Aunt, which is our weekly email where you can submit your common workplace problems. If you've got a problem, the link is in the show notes, so feel free to submit. Today, we are exploring the problem. I have just been made redundant. What do I do? And I'm thrilled to say that I'm joined by a guest. And it is the brilliant Jess Brewer, who is an HR consultant. We go way back. We used to work together, showing our age here, 15 years ago?
About that.
No, probably more than that. Hang on, how old am I?
It might be.
20 years ago? Oh, shit. Yeah. Please, can you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do?
Hi Tess, thank you very much for inviting me on your lovely podcast. Very exciting. I am Jess Brewer. I'm an HR consultant, which wasn't how we knew each other. It wasn't how I started my career. And actually redundancy did come into that part, so we'll get into that later. So I got into HR about 15 years ago. And I work for myself, work with a lot of small businesses, advising them with their people stuff.
Brill. So perfectly placed to help us out with lots of questions that I've got for you. So with things, yes, absolutely. With things like this, I like to start right at the beginning. So first of all, I had a little chat with our good mate Google and asked what redundancy actually is. And the definition that it gave me is really somber, but it said redundancy is when a business no longer needs an employee's role to be done by anyone.
Depressing, isn't it?
It's so depressing. Also known as layoffs, obviously, in America, I think. I'm sure it has multiple terms for every other place across the world, but today we are focusing very much on the UK. So, first of all, Jess, why does it feel like, I've been desperate to do this episode with you for so long because there are so many questions at the moment. Why does it feel like this is happening so much more often at the moment?
I think there's quite a few factors in that. I think there is, if we look back to sort of summer last year, the rate of redundancies was, sorry, I'm going to look at my notes so I get it right, 2.9 per 1,000 employees. By Christmas, sort of just gone, it was at 4.2 per 1,000. So there has been quite an increase over the sort of 6 months of last year. And that there was a slight dip sort of at the beginning of this year, but we're beginning to see that go back up. To put that into context, in the COVID spike, when lots of people were being made redundant, that was at 14.3 per 1,000.
Wow.
And generally over the last 2 years, it's been between 2 per 1,000 and 4.6 per 1,000. So we are at the top of that sort of normal range since 2008, I suppose. That sort of period. So there are quite a lot of factors, I suppose, that play into that, and certainly I think everybody was hopeful. Last year there was a lot of hesitation, I think, in the market. There was a lot of global elections going on. We obviously had an election here in the UK. We've obviously all know about the American election, joy that brought, and so I think there was that sort of hesitation. It stops investment decisions ultimately, and I think everyone was hopeful kind of going into this year that there'd be a bit more stability in the market, but unfortunately, as we all know, that hasn't really been the case. And so we're beginning to see people, having to make those difficult decisions because we haven't had that economic growth that basically stops redundancies happening. There are other factors, certainly in the UK, the national insurance contributions and the implications for businesses. Certainly there's been a lot of hiring freezing going on, but also I think it has also had the impact that redundancies have had to take place. There's also been an increase in minimum wage. That came at the beginning of April. So costs for businesses employing people have gone up. Usually, unless there's a crash, that generally means that there aren't the hiring decisions, but it will also mean that, if times have been not so great for a period of time, it's likely that they will start to make, difficult decisions. I also think it depends what stage of life you're at. So typically we see a lot of redundancies either with quite young workers, or you see them again with at sort of middle management levels. So that's why probably our sort of age group, you do tend to see some of that. And again, sort of the younger people who I'm sure will be listening also will be facing that. And those are quite key times where you feel it, I think.
Yeah.
And so there's lots of factors to why it may feel that it's happening more often, but there's certainly, the statistics do speak that it is at the top of
Yeah.
normal range.
You've just reminded me, actually, I saw a stat the other day that said since the budget, I think it was in October, 83% of SMEs have made redundancies because of the increase in minimum wage and various other factors, I'm sure, but that was like the sort of main one that was mentioned. And I think that's like really telling, because obviously most of the time we hear about the massive companies because they're the ones that sort of
Yeah.
hit the press and stuff, and they're the ones that everyone's talking about. And actually, perhaps part of the reason that it feels so prevalent at the moment is that it's not just the big ones that are feeling the pinch, it's everything else as well.
There's always a trickle down. So, if you look at the global economy and you've got lots of big investment decisions being paused and
Yeah.
not happening because of the turbulence of the market, which we know is the case, that, you think, well, I'm in the small business, why would that have, I'm in a, I don't
Yeah.
know, different small subsidiary business, why would that have any impact on me? But of course, the difficulty is it's a trickle down effect. Ultimately, if there aren't, people to, if people are losing their jobs or there isn't the investment in big infrastructure, then people that are making the small bits that go into that are not, then those businesses aren't making the money, and so it all kind of follows on. And ultimately, large businesses to some extent are, they do, they're obviously beholden to shareholders, so sometimes they restructure in a different way, and that happens. But I think we're now beginning to see, small businesses invariably never really want to make layoffs because, it's a smaller team, everybody, is not
Mm.
just a number on a spreadsheet, it's a much harder decision. But unfortunately, when the balance sheet starts to run dry, difficult decisions have to be
Yeah.
made, and that's really hard. And certainly, some of my clients are facing that, but equally, other clients are growing. So it really depends on what market you're in as well.
Yeah, that's so true, actually. We don't really think about it from the point of view of the person or the people that are making the redundancies. Like you say, in smaller companies, that's really tough.
It's
Like when
really
you've been
hard.
with each other from the beginning.
It's really, really hard.
Yeah.
And obviously that's more generally where I tend to be. But it's
Yeah.
I don't think anybody ever really wants to be in a position where they're making redundancies.
Yeah.
I think that's much harder when the person that you're making redundant is someone that and they've got a mortgage to pay and all of
Yeah.
those things. I think it is a lot easier when it's a number on a spreadsheet.
Yes. Which it is in most corporates. So don't forget that, which is the first point, actually, which is when redundancies happen, people can take them really personally. And actually, one of the biggest things that I've learned about being made redundant is that it's only ever a commercial decision. It's nothing to do with you. And I think that's kind of really important for people to remember. People that are going through this at the moment, that are feeling all the feelings, which are all totally normal. And then you're like, oh shit, is it me?
I think one of the biggest things when you go through it, and obviously through some of my coaching experiences, a lot of people come to me at that transitional point when they're going through redundancies, and it is really hard not to lose your confidence because
Yeah.
it's very natural to see it as a reflection of your ability, but ultimately, it is a commercial decision. Often, for example, if you've got several people at the same level, it might be that you're the highest paid out of that
Yeah.
group, and that actually sometimes can bite you on the bum. And there can be lots of different factors as to why that decision may be taken. But it doesn't mean that you're not good at what you do.
Yeah.
And also I think what's really important, and I know we'll get onto it later, but it's also remembering there are very few people these days that haven't experienced redundancy in
Yes.
some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And sometimes those people that you really respect and really like and think are really good. So actually, that's also a reminder
Yeah.
that it really isn't about you, and I think sometimes it's more prevalent in certain industries as well. And so that's certainly something to bear in mind, what industry you're in and things like that. So yeah, don't take it to heart.
Yeah. Very good point. Very comforting to know it's not you.
It's not you, it's me.
Yeah. It's definitely them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely them. Um, So one of the first steps I would, in fact, I'll go back a bit. So I have a different belief about redundancy actually. So I think I'm quite spiritual. We haven't reconnected all that much recently, Jess. You may not know this about me at the moment. So I'm quite spiritual, and I actually believe that redundancy is the universe's way of snapping you out of autopilot. Because in a lot of cases, people have been in jobs for multiple years, and that's when they have the real crisis of confidence, because that's often when their identity is tied up in their job and all that kind of stuff, which we'll probably come on to shortly. But I think it's the universe being like, okay, you've been existing in this role for a while now. You've not been living, there's been no intention behind it. You've just been sort of rolling up day after day in this kind of monotony. And I actually think that redundancy is a gift, because it comes with, basically gives you kind of time, and of most of the time, well, often a financial cushion to actually be able to kind of think about what it is that you really want. So if you're going through it at the moment, I actually believe it's a gift.
I would actually concur. So,
Love that.
not necessarily a gift. I probably wouldn't class myself as spiritual in quite the same way. I would probably reframe that as being an opportunity. I definitely
Nice.
think it's really easy to focus on the negative of a
Yes.
situation like that, and actually, sometimes you need to take that step back, which is where working with other people can really benefit.
Mm.
Outplacement coaching and all of that sort of stuff can be really useful, and taking that time to think about what you really want to do. But actually, it is an opportunity, and I've had experiences of it 3 times in my career,
Yeah.
and I think all of those have resulted in a turning point for me. So I
Yeah.
think it can be really positive if you allow.
Go, go on then. Tell us about those three experiences.
Okay, well, the first one was very early on in my career, so plays into that youth market.
Yeah.
I had moved from my first job to another publishing company, and the day I started, I knew that the company I was moving to was being bought by another publisher when I took the
Okay.
job, but I was assured that the magazines that I was going to be working on were being bought alongside this deal, and it was going to be a particularly large publishing house with this deal. The day I started, they announced that the deal was going through, but they weren't buying the publications that I was working on.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh God.
So it was a really interesting 3 months. It was also at the same time I was getting married, so I was like, I had a honeymoon booked and all of this. So
Oh.
I actually came back from honeymoon to be told pretty much I was being made. They'd closed 2 of the magazines that I was working on. We'd been up for sale the whole time that I'd been working there, and that I was being made redundant. And it was fine. I ended up going and getting I was still in conversations with another publisher that I'd worked with whilst I'd been at university, actually, and I went back and worked for them, sort of on a temporary basis. But actually, it was that led to us going to my husband and I deciding to go and live in Australia for a year, because although he had a job, we kind of went through the motions of going, oh, should we do this? Should we not do this? We've just got married. We should be buying a house like everyone tells you should do. And we decided, no, sod it. We were going to go off to Australia and have a year working out there,
I love
which we
that.
really did. And actually, what an experience to do.
Yeah.
Great opportunity to do it. We did it together, which was really nice. We did live and work out there. um, we did ultimately come back,
Yeah.
but it was really good to know, and I think really useful for both of us to realise that we could go and set up life
Yeah.
anywhere, and that was really, from a life point of view, not necessarily a career point of view, that was a really big transition.
Yeah.
Um,
I think it's such a good reminder, isn't it, that when you're made redundant, I think you just get a different perspective on stuff, and you just remember that the world is massive,
yeah,
but also really small, in that these days you can get quite literally to the other side of the world within a day, kind of thing. I mean, don't get me wrong, sometimes it's a really long flight, but
yes.
you can. And like you say, like depending on where you are in the world and visas and all that kind of stuff, you can even work from a different
Yeah.
place. And actually, I am kind of living proof of this, currently doing it now in Thailand. And, a lot of countries, particularly at the moment, they are, actively wanting to attract people in that work for themselves with like different types of visas and all this sort of stuff. I know some countries in Europe are really good at this. Thailand's obviously really good at this, and the opportunity is massive, and
Yeah.
I think it
And I
just
think
really
that's the
opens that
key,
up.
broaden your horizons and think about different things,
Yeah,
depending on your life stage, take different opportunities. So,
yeah,
that was a really good life lesson, I
love that.
suppose, quite early on in my
Yeah,
career.
yeah.
But the market was also quite buoyant then. It was pre 2008, so getting another
Okay.
job wasn't a particular fear.
Yeah.
Again, I'm properly giving away my age here, but anyway, such is life. But it was a very different market, I think we have to
Yeah.
say back then. And then, so actually, the second time I faced redundancy, I didn't actually get made redundancy, it was when we were working together. And I
Yes.
was working for a media agency
Yeah.
that
Let's
worked.
not name names. We don't
No,
want any lawsuits.
no, 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 no. But that's working. Tess was effectively my client,
Yeah.
and so that's how we
Your
know each
favorite client.
other. And so that was again, the property market crashed. There was lots of redundancies made at the time because we were a property marketing agency, and that experience actually was what led me into HR. So I didn't get made redundant on that
Okay.
particular occasion. I was one of the ones that was saved, and actually, I would say that was the work that was more of a difficult experience
Yes.
than actually the times I had been made redundant, because being stuck somewhere that isn't a particularly happy place to be
Yeah.
um, can actually be quite soul destroying in itself.
Yeah.
And I think there were, you know, the way that was handled and some of that experience was what, and having to manage that process as a manager and going through it with my team and that sort of thing was what led me, and some of the things that came out from that was what led me to think things can be done better.
Yeah.
And actually I moved away from the media world and into HR, where I have been happily ever since.
Just really
Um,
quickly on that, that is another really good point. People don't talk about the people that are left behind.
no,
So it's all very well the people that are made redundant. It's really scary at the time. It could be all sorts of emotions, exciting, terrifying, all of the above. And then they leave, and then everybody else is kind of left behind, slightly terrified about what's actually just happened, a bit shell shocked about what's going on, especially because sometimes it can happen really, really fast. And then also, again, probably exactly the same, kind of anxious and worried about their jobs and all that sort of thing. So, just really quickly, what would be your advice for managers who are managing teams that are going through this at the moment, and for the people that are left?
I think really do think about the people that are left,
Yeah.
including yourself. It's sort of survivor's guilt, I think,
Yes.
is quite hard. Quite often you'll end up, as I did, in a restructure. So you might have a different manager. And
Yeah.
I think it's really important for managers that take on people in that instance to really lead with curiosity and
Yeah.
kindness, because
Yeah.
actually it is quite a traumatic experience. You have to build that trust,
Yeah.
and rebuild that trust, because and also be mindful of the work levels that people are doing, because obviously, yes, the work levels will have fallen off. That's the reason that the redundancies have been made, but maybe not to the extent of a full person.
Yeah.
um, and it's something that you need to be mindful of, I think.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of work, I think, and support that is needed for businesses after going through redundancies to make sure that there is that team cohesion moving forward, because I think that can be a really difficult period.
Yeah, and I think as a manager, it's really important to like address the elephant in the room.
Yeah,
Like we've all collectively been through like a really difficult process, and we're all feeling a bit weird about it. And I think one of the best things that you can do is just embrace that, be fully honest about it, be really transparent with your team, and just sort of bring everybody together in a room and just be like, right, let's just, shall we just chat about how we're feeling?
yeah,
And then you as the manager kind of set a really good example and like an open and honest sort of forum, be like, I feel fucking weird about it, how's everyone else doing? And then
yeah.
just sort of let it go from there. And
And
I think
also be
that's,
prepared for people's emotions. Like,
yes,
I was in my mid to late 20s at that point, and I had good friends that
yeah,
disappeared, and then all of a sudden dynamic totally changed, and it was a really weird experience.
Yes.
And I think being mindful of those transitions and the impact that they have on people, if that is well managed, and by being well managed, that is just open communication, really, more than anything else. Being open, understanding, allowing people to voice their opinions, allowing them to kind of show up as they are. Having the expectations that they still need to deliver, absolutely, but understanding what's going on and trying to rebuild that culture, because ultimately that's the thing. There is a rebuilding of culture that then needs to happen, and that can be quite difficult.
Especially
if it's not done intentionally.
And especially in the run-up to redundancy, certainly all of my experiences, which we'll come on to shortly, have definitely had some of the same kind of themes, which is in the run-up, there's loads of kind of quiet meetings, or there's lots of meetings with senior teams. And to your point around kind of opening the lines of communication, they may have to be reopened, because as redundancy is happening, they're kind of closed down, and it's literally only the people that have to know are allowed to know, kind of thing, with all the
you have to rebuild that trust. That's
the thing. Exactly.
And it is, the onus is on the managers to have to rebuild that trust.
Absolutely. And you say, so is that two of your stories? You said there was three?
There is one more. And I wouldn't be here chatting to you today if it wasn't for the final story. Because I was one of the 14.3 per thousand in COVID that got made redundant, which actually led to me starting up on my own, which was now 5 years ago, amazingly, and I can't believe I've been in business for 5 years. So again, it was the push into doing something. It was something that had been on my mind, and I was very lucky that the job that I had, that I loved the job that I had, that I was made redundant from. It was absolutely, hands down, without any question, my favourite job ever. I had an incredible boss that worked with some incredibly bright, amazing people. I was very sad that it came to an end, but actually what they did leave me with was a huge level of confidence in what I could do and how I could help, and I'm fortunate that they've been supportive of my business since the get-go, and that has been really, really important. So
love that, so many opportunities. So my experience with redundancy, I actually forgot, I have also been through redundancy 3 times.
Oh, there we go.
So the first time for me...
Power of 3.
So I started my career in September 2008, and in October 2008, Lehman Brothers went down, and basically the kind of credit crunch, crash stuff all kicked off. Literally a month into my career.
I remember.
Yes, you were with us, kind of thing. And I had started at a property company, and I was work experience, and basically they made a load of people in my team redundant, and then offered me a job and kept me on because the workload stayed the same. I was really cheap in comparison to the other people that they had to, just reduce the headcount for. And it was really tricky, but obviously it also, like you say, you call it an opportunity, because it does open up opportunities even when you're in it and affected by it. And that was really interesting to happen really early on in my career, because I think I kind of learned in a big company like that, yes, our manager did care about us, but ultimately it's a commercial decision and you're a number, and somebody, however many layers removed, has said you have to get rid of X headcount, and that's it, kind of thing. So that was my first experience.
Because again, and I think it speaks to the people left behind and why that is so important, because actually, and also when you are that person left behind, that was a huge opportunity for you to grow that you might not have had that not happen. So even if it is feeling a bit ick, I think probably for you hadn't been there long enough necessarily to build those relationships, so it was probably, not saying it wasn't hard, but it probably wasn't, you didn't have that kind of familiarity, but an allegiance and all of that sort of thing, which I think you build up over time. But actually it can be a real opportunity for people left behind, and don't cut off your nose to spite your face.
Yeah, definitely. It was awkward, but like you say, fine. Everyone was really nice about it. Everyone was just kind of adults about it. Like, this is what's happening. It's not personal, kind of thing. So yeah, the second time was when I left that company, and basically I'd been there for 8 years, and they restructured the team, and they essentially created a role for me, and I don't think at any point thought I would take redundancy because I'd been there for so long. I was like such a safe pair of hands, and they, like I said, restructured the team, but they'd also created a role that basically had my name on. And I was like, this is interesting. I could stay, and it would have been so easy to stay. I loved it there, I really enjoyed it. Or I could actually try something different. And like I said, I believe that these opportunities are kind of sent to make us try something different. So I did, but then I think I was 30, and then no, I was just about to turn 30, so I got to my 30th birthday and I was single and unemployed. And I was like, oh God, this isn't how things were going to go. So I went traveling and I did my gap year at 30 instead of 18 and had an amazing time, highly recommend.
Yeah.
And then the third time for me happened actually really recently, so in February last year, at the most recent company that I was at, which was in finance. There were whispers in my team. It was a lesson in how not to do it. So there were whispers in my team about the fact that it was going to happen. I was quite excited because I'd always wanted to start my own business. And also I think it's quite fun to see how these things go and what happens and stuff. Having been through it a couple of times, knowing it's not personal, slightly detached from the situation kind of thing. But then we weren't actually officially told until May. So we had February to May of a lot of uncertainty, and actually the more junior people in the team were really affected by it, actually. And everyone was just like, what's going on? And then other teams in the business were quite obviously nervous to talk to us because they knew that we were going through something, but they weren't allowed to say anything to us. We couldn't say anything to them because we didn't really know. And it was just, the whole thing was just a bit messy, which is unexpected from a company like that, but it is what it is. Anyway, when the process eventually actually properly kicked off, they were amazing with all of us. They offered all of us jobs if we wanted to. They were really kind about it. They were actually really human about it, and just really nice about the whole thing. But actually, I think 4 of us left, but we left over quite a long period, which again was also quite disruptive because in May we knew that all the people that were going to leave were leaving. One left in August. I didn't leave to the end of November, and then I think there were one left in October or something. So that's again like really disrupting for the people left.
I think that's the difficulty that, and actually it's really hard. I'm really glad that was handled humanly
Yeah,
at the end.
yeah,
But I think there is something, there is a process and there is a legal process and there does have to be time and opportunity to discuss and all of that. But the quicker it can be handled, actually, I think the less damage that is done.
yeah,
Because actually it is that uncertainty that becomes quite toxic and, and breaks down the trust because, as you say, it's not, people aren't talking and you don't know, and there's lots of meetings behind closed doors and no one knows what's going on, and it really derails communication within an organisation, and that's not fun.
yeah. That's not fun. Speaking of which, so there is, each time I've been through it, they've been very quick to tell us that there is a policy that they have to follow, and haven't necessarily shared a huge amount of it with us. I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, that policy or process, process I assume has to be the same across the board, and policy I guess is up to the company. Can you sort of outline for people that are about to go through redundancy, are there like sort of key bits of the process that you can sort of outline now that they need to be aware of?
So there's usually a period of time between kind of when it's announced that you're under consultation and when you're actually made redundant, which I think has to be a minimum of 2 weeks. And that is, but quite often that's the bit that can draw out. And that is partly because they have to explore all alternatives. So it is with good thought that that is done. But that is also why that period of time can be quite difficult,
Yeah.
I think, because there's a lot of toing and froing, and that's where sort of the restructuring conversations end up happening and different opportunities. And
Yeah.
equally, someone can come back and say, well, I'm willing to go part-time, or other options you can put to them. So, but what I would always, there are quite a lot of good resources out there. So the government website obviously is one of them. That will tell you sort of what you should expect from redundancy pay, from a statutory standpoint, and also what to expect of the process. ACAS are excellent. They have a helpline. They can be really useful. Citizens Advice are another area that you can go to. And I would really, really recommend potentially speaking to all three, actually, and getting that advice, because there is something, nobody likes the problem with redundancy is you're out of control. And once the consultation is announced, you are out of control of this situation, something that you generally feel in control of your career. We are sort of fed the idea that we are in control of our career and we are the masters of our own destiny, which isn't always true. But kind of the sort of the rhetoric we get. So then when something comes out of left field and that gets challenged, it can be really discombobulating, I think. And you can sort of think, oh, hang on, but actually you can take back some of that control, which I think is always important in those situations, by understanding what to expect, what to get involved with, how to approach the conversations. Again, there are lots of different, obviously, Tessa, you're a career coach. I do that as well. So there are people like us and various others that you can chat with, and I think that can also be useful. Certainly to sort of guide you through that process and help you reposition it, whether you stay or whether you go, and also help you make that decision, because as you said, you had the experience of kind of making the decision that actually you were going to go even when there was a job offer on the table. And I think sometimes that can be a difficult decision, so sometimes that can be useful as well. But knowledge is power in that moment, so take the opportunity to take back the power and find out the information as it is. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I think often there's a employee representative that gets appointed. Use it, if that's not you, make sure you do use them and that you ask questions that you want to ask. And draw on the resources. There's lots online, some of the legal firms as well offer online advice. Do reach out.
That's great. I knew about the government website, gov.uk, ACAS, Citizen Advice. I'll put all these links and stuff to that in the show notes. You mentioned a really interesting point there around kind of why we dislike it so much is because we feel out of control. It feels really scary because we have, thought about our future or planned the summer holidays or planned the Christmas holidays or whatever, and not at any point were you not working in this job. And that's what's suddenly really scary, because that's what's kind of taken away from us. And I think it's really important to allow yourself to kind of feel all the emotions. They talk a bit about grief as well as anxiety, and potentially a mix of like anxiety and excitement about what the hell's going to happen. But then there's also this kind of layer of low level grief that's sort of a future that you had in mind. And I think from the work that I've done with clients and conversations that I've had, once you've kind of accepted that, then you can sort of see past the other side of it, which is actually and then what I think as well happens is we get loss aversion, and we suddenly think that the sun shines out of the proverbial arse of this job, and the job was always a bit shit, and actually you never really liked it that much, in some cases, not in all of them, but we suddenly think that we really, really want it. And I think you have to kind of go through the motions of feeling all the emotions, like I said, kind of processing them, allowing them, to then be able to take a step out of the other side and to realise that actually, like I said, you didn't perhaps love that job as much as you thought you did. And wow, how exciting about what could be next.
it's a huge part of our identity,
Yes.
and we are we are fed from very early, really. What do you want to be when you grow up? As though that's going to define, it's not how
Yeah.
are you going to be when you grow up? What sort of person do you want to show up as? It's
Yeah.
how do you, who do you want to be? What
Yeah.
job do and it's always defined with little children
Yeah.
as what job, whether it's a policeman or a fire, I should
Yeah.
say, police person or a fire person, but because that's obviously changed as well. But it's that sort of identity of who you're going to be, and actually, I think, we still, when we're talking, when you're talking to young people, it's still quite natural to kind of have that conversation as to what do you
Yeah.
want to do when you grow up. I didn't have a clue that I'd end up in HR. I didn't do a degree
Yeah.
in HR. I didn't start off in this way. And I think we actually have to be a little bit more, it's great to have ambitions and to have plans. That's why you have to shoot for the stars, but
Yeah.
you also have to be okay with what happens and the path, be in the moment and enjoy the things that actually happen to you along the way, because you never quite know when that path's going to change and you're going to have a different fork in the road, and you have to make that decision as to what you want to, where you want to go with it. So absolutely always have big plans and big ambitions and big goals, but also hold them loosely, I think, with
Yeah.
advice, because I think as you say, the people that find it the hardest are people that really identify themselves
Yes.
in that role as that person with that promotion. Their value as a person is based on what they do as a job, and
Yeah.
ultimately, in the reality, that isn't, the value of a person is not
Yeah.
it's not in your career, really.
Yeah.
You're yes, it has a value and it's wonderful when you're able to do it and it helps people and that sort of thing, and that does have value, but ultimately, actually there are many more qualities that you have as a human
Yeah.
that are equally valuable.
Yeah.
And I
And
think it's really important to kind of hold on to that, and you can only control what you can control.
yeah.
And when redundancy is one of those situations that you are not in control of, so you
Yeah.
control what you can control, and those things are understanding what the process is going to look like and understanding what your rights are, and also taking the time to kind of go, okay, whatever happens, what we're going to do about it, because
Yeah.
you can control that. You can
Yeah.
control how you respond to a difficult situation. You
Yeah.
can't control the difficult situation itself.
So what I'm taking from that, adaptability is key.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
I read this, and actually I wrote about it somewhere as well recently. Is that with the world as it is, and it's only going to kind of lean into that more as we come further into the age of AI. Like, adaptability is such an important skill to have in a career, in a workspace, in any kind of in personal life as well.
yeah.
Yeah. And then the other side of that, so it's really interesting that you talk about identity in your job. So I, as a lot of people do, I had a major burnout about 5 years ago, and part of the reason I think I burnt out is because I had so much of my identity tied up in my job, and we've touched on this already, and it's because of societal pressures. So I was 33, and I wasn't a mother, and I wasn't married, and I was gunning for this promotion, and I was like, if I'm not head of something or director level, then what the hell am I? Because I'm not a mother and I'm not a wife. And according to society, that's the only things that are important and that are valued. And it's really interesting because so my next question to you is how, and I'll tell you a little bit about what I did, but how could people remove their identity from their job? So for me, it was really tricky because basically I burnt out. Long story short, I burnt out. I realised that this promotion is not something that I ever wanted for many reasons. But I'd spent so long going for it that I was like, oh my God, who am I? What do I even do with my day if I'm not just so laser focused on this promotion? And it took me time and actually I was signed off work for a couple of weeks, and in that time I just kind of reconnected with myself, with family, with things outside work. I remembered that I had a life outside work. I started walking in nature again. I started prioritizing my physical, mental, social, spiritual, emotional health, all those kind of things, over and above my job as what would have been head of this or director of that or whatever. And I think that was kind of so important for me as part of my journey, to just absolutely emotionally detach from this job, but also recreate myself and just get back in touch with what I loved and what I was good at, to kind of build myself back up again. But I guess, yeah, my question to you would be, if people are really struggling because they are having a realization that their identity is in their job, what would your advice be?
I think if you're really struggling, reach out and get some external help, because
Yeah.
I think it's a very difficult path to navigate on your own if you're really struggling with it, because it's really hard to see the wood through the trees when you're in it.
Yeah.
If it's not overwhelmingly struggling, I think it's really important to go back to your values. It's kind of what we were just saying about, we identify us by what we are, not how we are. And actually, if you come back to how you want to show up, what is important to you as a person, I think that's where you can be a bit more grounded. And that, you know, it sounds a bit cliche really, but I think, you know, actually that can also, you know, what is it in the jobs that you've done? Like, actually take that time to reflect, you know, what is it in the jobs that you've done that you've been really good at, that you've enjoyed? You know, one of the things I always say, you know, for people looking for jobs and things, is to you know, create a data. Don't write a CV. Create a database of your star stories, and
Love that.
actually, I think it should be something that people should do throughout their career. In fact, actually, I get my 13-year-old daughter to do it now, because
Sorry, as if she's 13.
yeah, it's really important to think about what you do. Like, so it's situation, task, action, result. What have you done? So, you know, for her, being in a school play, you know, what was the task? Where it was to get up on stage and, you know, work as a team and all of those sort of things. And, you know, what was the action? Well, you know, I got up, I did it, I remember my lines, I did all of this. And what was the result? Well, actually, it was really good fun. I made some really good friends. I interacted with lots of different people, you know, and actually thinking about those things. And there's different, I mean, that's a nice kids example, but it simplifies it. And I think thinking about keeping something like that for yourself, not just for recruitment, something, you know, things that you've done, situations, things that you've been involved with, might be volunteering, might be things in your personal life that you have been proud of, that you're pleased that you did, things that, you know, an achievement that you see. If you can keep that through, you know, as an ongoing process, rather than, oh, I'm looking for a job, so I better think about what things I've done in that job, and actually creating a database of things. What that does is give you something to talk about in interviews and different opportunities. I remember my very first interview was really bizarre, and I remember it, you know, the very first question I got asked was, tell me your earliest childhood memory. And this whole interview went on like this. And I remember speaking to the director of the business afterwards and saying it was the weirdest experience, but I can see you've got this amazing team of people. And, you know, it was a sales role. And she was like, well, if you can't sell yourself, what can you sell? And, you know, and the whole process was taking you through, could you tell stories, you know, with a point, effectively. And it was really clever, and it's stayed with me. But I think there is something in, you know, how do you keep that confidence in yourself, and, you know, how do you look at, you know, different opportunities, and, you know, how do you retain that? Well, actually, if you remember yourself as the whole person, you know, all the things you've done, that you showed up about, you know, we always berate ourselves for the terrible things that we do.
Yep.
We always hold on to those. They stay there. But we don't seem to always remember the good things that we do. And I think, you know, that there's an exercise, I think, a coaching exercise that I was asked to do. We have to get there's 5 questions for 5 people. You ask people for different insights about you, which is also really powerful. That's another thing you can do to build your confidence.
Nice.
And, you know, working with, you know, asking people that you you value
Mm.
these questions about you. And things like that can be really useful tools in that moment for helping you to kind of rebuild your confidence and find out who you are, how you are, not what you are. And I think then
Yeah.
it starts to detract from just you being, you know, project director or head of or whatever. And actually it's you as, a friend, a
Yeah.
daughter, a sister, you know, a community leader, whatever things it is that are in your life. As you say, it might not be being a mom, being an auntie,
Yeah.
being a godmother, all those things that
Yeah.
you are more than your job.
Yes.
You are always more than your job. And that's the beauty of being human, is that we're multifaceted
Yes.
and do lots of things, and we're not just one thing. And I think it's really hard when you're in that situation to remember that's not, because it's a big part of our life, right? Your career,
Yeah.
work is 5 days a week. We spend an awful lot of time with the people we work with. It's absolutely understandable for it to feel like a really big deal. It is a really big deal, but it's
Yeah.
not the be all and end all. And you can
Yeah.
separate yourself from that identity, I think, with a bit of work.
You mentioned something really nice there, and actually ties in really nicely with how I teach, kind of what I talk about as well. So I believe that confidence is actually a side effect of knowing, accepting who you are. So I think this identity piece, so if you're going through redundancy at the moment, if you're really struggling, if you're suddenly realizing that you're having a bit of a crisis of confidence because you're like, shit, who am I and what do I do, whatever, it absolutely does start with going back to basics. And I do a couple of exercises with my clients, and it ties in really nicely with everything that you've just said, and it's kind of the first step for most of the stuff that I do, which is just getting back in tune with who you are. Because I think society and jobs that are really difficult, or even jobs that are really mundane, or jobs that are really stressful, they take over your life. Even, like I said, even one that's really mundane, there is still a kind of a thought process of, I don't like this job. There is not a thought process of, how do I change this? Who am I, and what do I actually want to do with my life? And this is a gift that I believe redundancy gives you, and something that I think we often only do when something like this happens, to kind of break that thought process, isn't it? Or kind of breaks, like a circuit break, isn't it? When something shatters what you thought was true, or whatever it may be, whether it's redundancy or something else. But the most important place to start is just reconnect with who you are, and that is what you value, what you love, what you're good at. And then a kind of step further from that is talking to those people around you and hearing them say these wonderful things about you. And some of it might be, if you're asking colleagues and stuff, it'll obviously have like a work slant. But if you're asking friends and family and stuff, they'll come back with the most wonderful things. And that is where we can start to kind of reboost that confidence. I think it's also where you can start to be more honest with yourself about the fact that, go through the job that you've just about to be made redundant from, or just been made redundant from, and just go through which bits you loved and which you didn't, and just lean fully into what you love. For so long in my role, I was being pushed into one that was super technical. We were in like SQL, trying to code all the time, and I could spend many years in SQL. I would never enjoy it. I don't want to write code. I want to talk to people. I want to help people. People are my thing. Coding is not. And, you know, when you're made redundant, like I said, you believe that you get this loss aversion to that job, but actually, like I said, go through the motions, take a step back, think about who you are, what you love, and go through, be really, really objective with that job, and be like, actually, I didn't really like maybe even 50% of that, and I've just put up with that for so long. And you have these kind of real revelations where you were just existing at work. And actually, I strongly believe, and I, talk about this a lot, that everyone can love what they do. They just need to know how to do that, or what it is that they want to do. And it all starts with clarity and kind of getting back in touch with it and stuff. So yeah, I love that. Also, love, create a database of your star stories. I've literally written that down. I love that. Oops.
It's such a useful I was saying to you earlier, I think, about I've done some work with one of the local secondary schools, and I'm sure they all
Yeah.
ignored me. But I was the same thing. I was like, just write it down, like, because even if you don't then use it in your CV, it gives you other things to talk about in the
Yeah.
interview. And you can think about, is that story, ultimately, even in an interview situation, people buy people.
Yeah.
You are selling yourself. I mean, obviously, I was going for a sales role in that particular instance with that particular question of what was your earliest childhood memory. But you are still selling yourself. So being
Yeah.
able to storytell is a really useful art, and having a bank of different stories that show you in different lights and the
Yeah.
response to different questions is really helpful. The difficulty is maintaining that. As you know, it's much easier if you maintain that as you go along. It's much easier when you're then doing that recruitment process. But it's also become more and more important because of the use of AI in recruitment.
Yeah.
You can't just have one CV. You need to tailor
Yeah.
your CV to the job description and what that's asking, because you don't need to. There's always a human that reviews these things. Let me
Yeah.
caveat that. However, it's much easier if if you've got a job description in front of you and you're pulling out examples for the things that they are specifically asking for, rather than, we used to always rewrite a cover letter, I suppose, and that
Yeah.
thing, which doesn't happen now. And the problem is with recruitment on LinkedIn, you bosh out oh, well, I've done my one CV and I've applied for 100 jobs, and I've seen it on like TikTok and stuff where people are
Yeah.
like, I've applied for 500 jobs and I've not had any responses. And you're like, if you do the same thing again and again and again, you get the same result and you don't change anything.
Yeah.
Duh.
That's the
you know
definition of madness.
So you're just sat there going, that's not the answer. And actually, be a little bit more thoughtful and tactical
Yeah.
about it. And that's where having that database is actually really helpful, because then it just simplifies creating that tailored database, that tailored CV, sorry.
Yeah.
It just makes it a bit quicker. But I think that, it can be really helpful. And actually, it's a really useful tool for many, rebuilding your confidence
Yeah.
in any shape of life or any reason that you need to refer to it. So
Yeah.
it is. I don't know whether my advice is ever taken. I have had some clients that have done it and that have used it when they're looking. Whether they keep it up or not, I don't know.
I'm sure it is, Jess. I'm sure it is. Also really good for, I was thinking it'd be really good for like if you want to get promoted and stuff as well. It's just keeping a log
Yeah,
of like
absolutely. I think that's the
all the
thing.
good stuff
We
that you've done.
forget all the things we've done. And
Yeah.
if it just becomes a natural thing that I've done this piece of work, or I've done, this activity, or this, big project, and I'm just going to write, 4 little things about it, and you just do it, it just becomes natural. Then you don't
Yeah.
forget the things that the achievements that you've made, which I think is really easy. It's also really useful for performance reviews.
Yeah.
One of the biggest issues with lots of companies, they do the annual performance review, which is, and the big issue with that is that you really are taking from the last 3 months. The
Yeah.
chances of the fact that you're remembering what you did 12 months ago is pretty minimal. You
Yeah.
might have, if it was a really big project, you might. But chances are, for most of us, we're looking at the last 3 months. Well, if you've had a really good beginning of the year and a bit of an average second part of the year, then that's not a true reflection of your year. So, you need to kind of balance it out a little bit.
Very good advice. Excuse me. So we talked a little bit about sorry, I need to cough again. I'm sorry. That's better. We talked there about we've covered a lot of ground in a very quick time. We talked there about the process. Let's just go back to that a second. So there's a 2-week process between when it's kind of officially
I think that's the
announced.
minimum.
Is that's a minimum thing? And then is there a like period of time? So within that 2 weeks, you are having conversations. So if you're one of the people that are they call it at risk, right?
Yeah.
So if you're one of the people at risk, then within that 2 weeks, it's called consultation period, right? You have conversations about, am I right in saying in every single case they have to find you an appropriate other job, or they have
No,
to
they
be
don't know that.
seen
That's
to
more
do that?
typical in larger organisations.
Okay.
They have to be seen to, obviously, ultimately, redundancy is cost saving.
Yeah.
And so if you can show other ways that that cost can be minimised, or you can come up with, say for example, two people doing the same job decided, well, actually, we're willing to do a job share. And we've had this
Yeah.
conversation, and we're willing to do 2.5 days a week each, or I'm willing to do 3 days and this person's going to do 2 days.
Yeah.
You can put that proposal forward now,
Okay.
and that's that opportunity to do things like that. So that's in the concept, and that again, it is different in a larger organization. Usually that period goes on for longer, but there are, and that would be more likely when they'll restructure and find other roles for you and things like that. If there are other roles, that would still apply in a small business, but obviously in a small business there's much less likelihood that there are going to be other roles. So for smaller businesses it's more likely to be cost savings. There are different rules depending on the size of the organisation as well. So I know for small businesses it's a minimum of 2 weeks. It may be more for larger businesses, I'm not sure.
Okay. So that's really good to know, actually, because I don't think it ever crossed my mind at any stage of being made redundant that actually you can talk to the other people that are affected. And if a couple of you, if a couple of you really want to stay, then you can discuss a job share, and actually you can be proactive on the back of it, and you can go back to them and put forward suggestions and proposals and stuff.
Yeah, that's that consultation period ultimately. Is they don't have to accept it. There may be business reasons why that's but yeah, absolutely, you absolutely can. This is your opportunity to negotiate effectively. And show how you're, and it's difficult because the problem is when you're at risk, if you then put that forward, you then think, oh, but I might not have been made redundant for, and so that's why people don't do it.
Yeah, fair. That's really good
and so you do have to consider that. But I think sometimes it is easier in smaller organizations because people know each other.
Yeah.
In a different way. The conversations can be easier. Senior level, the decision makers are closer to the team, and so those conversations can be slightly different and a little bit more open. But I think it's one of those things we often in any situation, workplace situation, particularly where there's law, that comes into it, it sort of takes away the opportunity to have honest conversation. And actually it's a real shame. Because and I totally understand it, everybody's trying to protect themselves in that situation, and rightly so. And it does also get in the way of actually, well, hang on a minute, we've got a problem here. Is there there may be a solution that the leadership haven't thought of, and actually that's your opportunity to put that forward.
That's a really good point. Really good point. Okay, so if we're to give practical advice for kind of each step of the process that you're going through, so if you're hearing, so say anyone going through it now that's kind of sort of hearing whispers and stuff around them that they think redundancy is happening, I guess the first step is kind of accept the emotions that are coming up, go for it, move through them, walk through them. The next thing, I guess, number 2 would be sort of arm yourself with information. So look at those resources, look at gov.uk, ACAS, Helpline and Citizen Advice. And then what other steps would you include in that as sort of anything kind of pre or during the process? I guess kind of talk to others around you.
I think don't panic.
Nice. Excellent advice.
Don't always listen to hearsay. The problem is when things are going negatively, it is when the toxic behaviour comes out, and the whispering and the rumours and all of that sort of stuff. It's really, really easy to get drawn into gossip. It's natural. However, take it with unless something is told to you factually, it's not necessarily the case. There is no point worrying about what may happen until you're actually facing it. Now, that doesn't mean you can't be prepared. If you think there are signs that redundancy is happening, and there are obviously things, the economic climate, if your workload is lessened, if you can see that less deals are getting done, or there's more pressure on you to get more deals done, if there's massive cost cutting going on, if there's hiring freezing, we all know that those are the signs that things are not going so well.
That's some
And
pretty
the
big
last
signals.
resort, unfortunately, is redundancies
Yeah.
and restructuring. Now, in larger organisations, that often involves restructuring, so it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be completely out of a job. It might just mean that you're put into a different part of the organisation. However, what you can do when any of that uncertainty rears its head is take a proactive stance.
Yeah.
Don't panic. Have a plan. Think about your, before it happens, think about your CV, think about, what you might want to do, think about, like you said, be honest about what it is that you like about your job, but also what you don't like about your job. Take the opportunity for reflection. And that, you can be proactive in that. You don't have to wait till the redundancy's there, potentially, to look for a job. If you're under 2 years, redundancy pay is minimal. So, you might want to consider that. And, be mindful of that situation. So, you can be proactive, you can do things, you can, understand exactly what your pay would be based on your length of service. And all of that sort of thing. That's where the government website comes in. If you think that there are, perhaps there is mistreatment going on, then ACAS again is a really useful resource for finding out kind of how the process should be being handled. But I think, my ultimate, try and remain calm. It is ultimately a crisis situation when it actually happens, and it can feel like that. So actually, as with any crisis, the calmer you can remain, the clearer you can think, and the better action you can take. And you can do things beforehand, but if it comes to then being under consultation, get help. ACAS line is free, citizen advice is free, the government website is free. There's lots and lots of resources. We're really lucky to have the wonderful world of Google at our fingertips, which didn't exist in the same way 20 odd years ago. And that information is all there. So use those resources, speak to people that brush up your LinkedIn profile, tidy up your CV, create that star story database. You can do proactive things at that point, to avoid that kind of the problem is you go into freeze mode, I think, often, panic. Particularly in that sort of situation, you're just, I can't do anything. So if you think it's happening, you can be proactive beforehand, but try not to get too drawn into the gossip. It may not happen.
Love that. Don't panic. Read all the resources. What was I going to say? So one thing that just sprung to mind there is that if it were me and I was going through it now, I would probably go to ChatGPT and be like, what does this mean? But actually, is that actually a good resource? Are people better to go to citizen advice, gov.uk, all that kind of thing?
I think you always will be better to go to the
official
source. It doesn't necessarily mean like going to ChatGPT and asking them to help you create a plan of action for dealing with the redundancy process, or some questions to ask about the redundancy. It's absolutely a great resource. There's no getting around it. So use it, but just don't only use it. I think that's true in all instances. Don't rely on one thing. Knowledge is power. Find out, make your own decisions. Educate yourself, because, as you say, redundancy can be a massive opportunity. Providing, and that is actually, it's an opportunity whether you stay or whether you go or what you do. It doesn't feel like it because we don't naturally like change, and we certainly don't like change that's forcible. But it is a period of change, whether you stay or whether you go. So, arming yourself with the skills that help for that, are always going to be useful. And, the more knowledge you have, the easier it is to negotiate, different opportunities, things that come up. I was and don't take it as the final thing. There are sometimes opportunity, if you're working on a piece of work, for example, and they say, oh, we're going to make you redundant from this date, you can say, well, actually, this piece of work, I think, there's an argument for why I should stay on it, and, staying on till that piece of work is done, because I'd like to see it through. Like, you can have those conversations. Don't be afraid to have those conversations. They might be met with a no, but...
And that's really good advice, actually. So a colleague of mine, when we all left, he left about literally, I think it was a week before his 3-year anniversary. So he missed out on extra pay because he got his dates muddled. So word of advice, if it's happening for you, just double check your dates. And like you say, if there is a way that you can negotiate your end date, there was for me as well. So I took my end date past into my 6th year. So again, so I'd get a bit more money. So if you can do that, it's
yeah,
great.
I think absolutely. There's, and that's where that knowledge is really useful. And it is really important to think about, what is best for you sometimes in that situation. And equally, don't be afraid to ask for things. I had my I had some training done as part of a redundancy package and paid for. So take the opportunity.
Nice, love that.
It was wonderful, and it really set me up. So I'm extremely grateful for it.
Brill. So don't panic, look at the resources, update your CV. One last question for you, because we're doing very well on time. What should people say in interviews if they've been made redundant, or should they not mention it, or should they, how would you
worry about saying that you've been made redundant?
Okay, you just don't mention it.
No, I think you should. I think I wouldn't worry about, in some businesses, it's really useful. You can start straight away.
True.
That is really handy.
True.
And actually that has a lot of advantage, and lots of businesses now, I would be very surprised anybody that had any experience of work, which invariably most people interviewing have had some experience of work, would have particularly negative connotation of someone that's been made redundant. It's a really normal, both of us have faced it 3 times.
Yeah.
It's quite a normal part of a career.
Definitely nothing to do with us, Jess. Maybe we're not the authority on it yet.
But it is. I mean, I can't think of many people I know that haven't faced it at some point.
Yeah.
That have been working full time.
Same. I actually did a poll on my LinkedIn fairly recently, and 70% have had it twice or more.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. You will find that, and absolutely, the first time I got made redundant, I totally didn't talk about it, and I thought it was a real reflection of me, and I didn't use it. And actually, I would take, as I have quite openly talked about it on here, it isn't that, and I don't think. I don't think it is a reflection. And quite often, if people have been there under 2 years, it's quite normal that they get made redundant first. It isn't any reason other than the cost of making someone redundant at that stage is less. I wouldn't worry too much.
Love that.
But I genuinely think if you're in an interview, you need to show up as yourself, because if the job is for you, it's a 2-way street, an interview. And if the job is meant to be the right job for you, if you don't show up as yourself, it probably, it's not going to be good. And if someone's going to decide that they don't want you because you were made redundant, do you really want to work for them?
Yeah, fair. Good advice. Don't lie from the interview. Oh, Jess, it's been so wonderful reconnecting with you. Thank you so much for agreeing to be a guest. My last question for you is, we've covered loads and loads of things today, but is there anything that we haven't talked about that you think is really important for anybody listening who's going through or facing redundancy?
We probably have covered it, but I think ultimately be kind to yourself. It is a really difficult process. Some people really struggle with it. There are lots of resources, including with Mind, that really help people with their mental health going through that situation. If you got made redundant and you're really struggling to find a job, you're not alone. It is really tough. there are things that you can do to, absolutely build your network on LinkedIn, do all of those things, but it is really hard, and know that you're not alone. It's hard for lots of people, and do reach out and get help, because it's not an easy thing to go through.
Yeah. Excellent advice, and a lovely place to end. Please reach out to Jess or me if you're going through it and really struggling. Oh, well, thank you so much for being here, Jess. It's been so nice to chat to you.
Lovely to talk to you as well.
Brill. And thank you so much for you at home, I was going to say. Yeah, I feel like I'm a TV presenter suddenly. I feel like I'm on Blue Peter. Thanks to you at home for watching or listening. Wherever you are, if you can follow, like, subscribe, whatever it is that you do on whatever platform you're watching or listening on, that would be amazing. Thank you so much. And yeah, in the meantime, have a great day, and hopefully see you next time. Thanks. Bye.